Here we are on Iona, the holy island of Scotland, really the holy island of all of the British Isles. And what a beautiful day it is for us to be here. We just left the graveyard and a chapel, and now we're at the recreation of the abbey, the building up of the abbey that had been built here by Columcille way back into the 6th century AD. People have come here for many, many centuries. Kings are buried in the graveyard. But I think it's good for us. We're here to pray. We're here to meet God because we're concerned about Scotland. We're concerned about America. We're concerned about the world. And this is a place of prayer and contemplation. We'll be going to the top of the hill here right after lunch, and we'll be at the top of the highest mountain. We'll be able to see throughout the Isles. It's good to remember the power of prayer. Let me tell you a little story. In 1982, the world was divided between the Soviet Union and the West. Thermonuclear war seemed right around the corner. It seemed very unlikely that we would not see the destruction of much of Western civilization. East Germany had been in bondage for over 40 years, first to the Nazis and now to the communists. And the communists had taken all of Eastern Germany and they'd blocked it off with a wall in 1961. And the people of East Germany were suffering. They were suffering under great distress, especially the Christians of Germany. And there was one pastor who I had the privilege of interviewing in 2001. He's the liberator of Germany. And I'll tell you the story of what happened. In 1982, under the persecution of the communists, Christian Führer was the pastor of a large cathedral in Leipzig. And it was a Lutheran cathedral, and he began a prayer meeting on Monday nights where he would light 40 candles and the people would gather together to pray for peace and for liberation. And as they began to pray, they were persecuted for it. First, the men lost their jobs that came to the prayer meeting, and then the pastor himself was thrown out in the snow 20 miles from the town, hoping he'd die. But he came back on Monday afternoon at 5 o'clock. He was back in his chapel with his prayer candles, praying with several hundred. The teenagers came in and filled the place of the men who had lost their jobs, and they continued to pray. And this prayer meeting went on for 7 years. Hardly anyone, nobody in the media was talking about the fall of the Soviet Union. Nobody was talking about the fall of the Berlin Wall. It wasn't even a discussion. But it was a discussion to God every Monday afternoon in prayer by Christian Führer and his friends and the members of his church. On October 9th of 1989, they had another prayer meeting on a Monday night. This time, instead of having 40 candles in the front, he brought one candle and passed out 2,000 candles to fill the cathedral. And as he passed the candle around, it filled the cathedral with light, and he told the people, we're not staying here tonight. There are going to be tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of German people are going to meet us outside with candles of their own. And we're going to march on the train station, we're going to march on the Soviet tanks, and we're going to march on the Democratic Republic machine guns that are being lined up. And we're going to do it peacefully with these candles. So he marched out, 80 to 100,000 gathered outside, not only in this town, but in 8 other towns throughout Germany that night. And as they marched a half mile across a huge train station, they marched right up to their own friends and neighbors who had now become soldiers in the communist army. And they marched right up to them and then marched around them while they were holding their guns with orders to shoot and with the tanks behind them. Never had the Soviet Union allowed such a demonstration against their power. And yet they could do little, because what happened that night is that suddenly one of the German soldiers dropped his machine gun and picked up a candle, and then another one dropped his machine gun. Pretty soon all of the soldiers dropped their guns, picked up a candle and turned on the Russian tanks. The Russian tanks, realizing the foolhardy nature of their situation, turned back into the barracks and left. And within 1 week, Honecker, the tyrant that was controlling Germany, was forced to quit. And within 3 weeks, exactly, the Berlin Wall came down. Most people think that the Berlin Wall came down either because Ronald Reagan came there in 1987 and said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, or because of other factors. The truth is that behind the scenes, through a prayer meeting that went on for 7 years, not only there in Leipzig, but then a prayer movement that spread throughout Germany, the German people remembered that God Almighty is sovereign. He's over all tyrants. And that if they would pray and believe him, that he could liberate them, and he did so peacefully. How do we know the importance of that night, October 9th? Well, because the people of Germany do not celebrate the fall of the Berlin Wall on November 9th as the date of their liberation. They celebrate it on October 9th, the night of the prayer meeting, with a giant candle that is now a monument in front of his church in Leipzig. The man who died last summer after 25 years. At the 25th anniversary, he died, but he will be remembered as the man who led the prayer meeting that brought down the Soviet Union. So what does that mean to us today? It means that God, being sovereign, looks to his people, and as he looks to them in prayer, he can change and does change the course of history. He turns the head of the king wherever he wills. If we, at this present time, faced with chaos and tyranny throughout the world, will look to him and pray and believe him and trust him, he can and will change our world and bring peace to nations untold. That's why we're here in Iona in September of 2015.